Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I have two book reviews for you. Both of them are romantasies that are kind of popular right now, and I read both of them. I have strong feelings about both of them. I loved one, I did not love the other, so I thought we would go ahead and just do a short video reviewing both of them. So, the first book I'm going to talk about is the book that I loved, which is When the Moon Hatched. This book I didn't even really know about until like a few days before it came out. It just recently came out, maybe like a week and a half ago or something like that. And I actually saw this on TikTok. I saw a couple people talking about the cover, and someone reviewed it saying that this book, this fantasy romance, is going to be the fantasy romance for 2024. And that it has a perfect blend of fantasy and romance. And honestly, that is my biggest gripe with Romantasy. I feel like that blend is never met. I feel like in general, most romantasies lean heavily on lust, which is very disappointing for me because that's not my bag. And anyway, we'll talk about that maybe at another time. Anyway, so the day When the Moon Hatched released, I immediately got it off of KU and started reading it. It is a very long book. It's something like 700 pages, and I just recently finished it. So it took me a good while to read, but I have to say, from the moment I started reading this book, I had this feeling like, okay, there is something truly, truly special about this book, and I was so excited because I have not read a fantasy romance that I loved since I first discovered Carissa Broadbent in 2022. Like, I have not found a fantasy romance author that I have loved and adored since then. And this is not the first book that this author has written. I actually have read one of her books before. It is this. This is the cover, To Bleed a Crystal Bloom, which I thought was okay. I gave it 3 stars. I didn't love it, but I thought it had a lot of potential, but it kind of missed the mark for me. But When the Moon Hatched, I absolutely loved. Like, I really, really did. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't have some flaws that I noticed, because I did, but I gave this book 5 stars, and if you are like me and you want your romantasy to have a very well-built fantasy world, and you also want there to be a romance that takes time to develop and makes a lot of sense and is a little bit heart-aching and just beautiful, I also think you would really love this. If you like a really strong heroine who can be sassy at times and is a complete bad A, she's a mercenary heroine. And if you like that type of character, I think you would also really, really love this. If you like dragons, but you are kind of tired of the way dragons are commonly represented to be a little bit just too like humans, I think you would love this. I just, honestly, when I started reading this book, I was just like, this is going to be my new obsession. Like, I just know it is. But I kept, like, waiting for something to happen that was going to dim my enjoyment of it, because that's happened to me a lot. But that did not happen this time. I will say that, I'm going to get to the plot summary in just a minute. I will say that at times, the writing style did kind of pull me out of the story. This author really, really is doing a lot of work with her writing style. I feel like she's very intentional with her words, and I very much enjoy that. And she's really reaching and aiming for a beautiful, almost, not really archaic, but a type of writing style that really fits with a historical or a fantastical setting. Like, it feels very well suited to the world. Sometimes, and maybe kind of oftentimes, the writing is a little bit overwrought. She does seem to be overwriting a bit. There's way too much description in here. This book didn't need to be quite this long, I don't feel like. I feel like it could have been edited down. And there were some turns of phrase that she uses that I feel like she was reaching to be something really beautiful and impactful, but it kind of came across in an awkward way, or a just shooting over the mark, a little bit overwrought, basically. So that's typically called purple prose. And I think that, yeah, she definitely does that. But I personally don't mind that. And honestly, I have read so many sub to below par romantasies that I really admire when an author really tries to improve on their writing style and to really have a unique and distinctive writing style. And they're using words in a way that is suiting the tone of the story, and they're going for impact. So even though I feel like she could have toned it down a little bit and maybe used a bit more restraint, because in my opinion that's when prose is the most beautiful, when it's not just all of these words thrown out there, even if they are emotional at some point. But really beautiful prose works when it is edited down to not like just the bare minimum, but when they're being very precise with the words they're using to get their impact across, and then maybe you add in some words here and there to make it really flow and be beautiful. So I feel like she's really close to that, but she's sort of overdoing it kind of a lot. Like there were some, I highlighted a lot of passages in this book that just sort of felt a little bit awkward phrasing, you know, a little bit overwrought is the best way to describe it, because I'm not of the opinion that purple prose is bad. Laini Taylor writes purple prose, and she's one of my absolute favorite authors on the planet. I just love her so much. She does use a good deal of restraint. She is a wordsmith in every sense of the word. Laini Taylor, that's what I'm talking about there. But, so I do feel like Sarah Parker has so much potential with her writing, and I can't wait to see what happens. I feel like if she had kind of edited and tightened up a lot of this book, she would have hit more powerful and impactful prose, but it does tend to read a bit overwrought. So if that's something that you're sensitive to, just be aware and, you know that going in. I was aware of that, but because I was so invested in the fantasy world and the characters and the story that was being told here, I didn't even care. Like, I was like, that combined with the fact that I do really admire her shooting to be a wordsmith and not just to come in here and just not even know how to write. Like, she knows how to write and she's really taking the time with her words, but I feel like she's just overdoing a little. So that's overall my #1 complaint with the book, that in itself. And that's something that's very personal from author to author and from reader to reader. Some readers aren't going to notice that at all. Some readers are going to really have a hard time working through that to get to the story. And some readers are going to love that. Some readers are going to read these words and feel like, yes, this is beautiful, this is hitting me, right? So it's a very personal and subjective thing. This is obviously just my opinion on it. So, again, that literally is the only downfall for me personally. And again, I was just so completely swept away with the uniqueness of the story. It's not even it's technically not a super unique story, because these are all elements that we've seen before in romance, in fantasy, but the way they were all put together, combined with the way she built her world, seemed very unique, very fresh, and just very, very well thought out. And again, that's what I want to see. I want to see fantasy worlds in Romantasy that are well thought out, that are well built, that are well developed. So, the basic premise of this, I don't want to give any spoilers away because there is a lot of stuff that you sort of want to be able to enjoy and reveal as you're reading this book, but the basic premise is our main character, Rave, she's an assassin, a mercenary for a rebellion group who is trying to bring down the kingdom. And she is actually being hunted by this bounty hunter who never misses his target. Like, he gets them every single time. And so she kind of goes to lay low. Some things happen with the bounty hunter and her life is upended and she's thrown into the prisons in the bottom of the castle and sentenced to death, basically. That's what really sets our story in motion, because that's when she meets our hero, or romantic lead. His name is Khan. He actually beheaded his father, the king, and because he was wicked, he rules in a different empire. And he sees our heroine for the first time, and he feels this like soul connection, this awareness of this sort of like remembering who she was without ever having known her before. And our heroine is strong, but she has this like entity within her that can sort of come out and overpower her, and maybe not even overpower. It's sort of like a symbiotic relationship, and that is a very powerful being inside of her. So Khan, our hero, meets her for the first time, and he is just struck with this feeling of remembrance of knowing who she is, while also knowing that he's never seen her before. So he works to get her out of prison, and then they go to further the story along to try and figure out, he wants to get her to remember who she was. He's trying to figure out if she actually is who he thinks she is, who he fell in love with. You know, he believes her to be this long lost love that he has. So Khan has been scouring the kingdom looking for moon shards, and that's another which ties into their history of how he lost his love, and he's looking for these moon shards for her. And basically, another part of this world that is super, super interesting is that dragons are a part of this world. And the creators of the world did not realize when dragons died that they would not just pass away on the earth, that they would actually have their tombs up in the sky. So when a dragon dies, it can either fall to the ground and turn into something that's like some type of like, it's not like a rock or a moon, it's similar to that, and like shatter, or it could possibly even just fall to the ground and be preserved in that way. So one dragon fell to the ground, shattered, and that's what Khan is going to find is the shards of that moon that fell and shattered, which is a dragon. So the humans and the dragons in this world, they have a very, very close relationship. Very strong, very close. They bond. It's really a beautiful, one of my favorite parts of this whole book. And so the creators didn't realize when dragons would die that they would either go up into the sky as a moon, and that's where their forever tomb would be, and that sometimes there would be the possibility that a moon would fall and shatter to the ground. And anyway, it's just this really, really cool, beautiful part of the story. So I loved everything about this, honestly. I was very pleasantly surprised. I thought it was truly fantastic. I had no problem with our heroine, who I think she could be difficult for some people because she is very stubborn, she is very independent, and sometimes she doesn't make decisions that you want her to make, you know? So if you kind of struggle with heroines like that, she may not be your favorite, but I loved her, and for me personally, I don't need to agree with what a character does. As long as that author has created a character that feels real, and the decisions they are making feel very real to that character, whether they have some type of past trauma or something that gives me an insight as to why this character would behave that way, I really don't even care what the character does, honestly. As long as I have that insight, the author has given me the insight as to why a character may be behaving the way they are, then I'm on board with it. And I do think that Sarah really set the stage for us to understand why our heroine is acting the way that she is, you know, why she's so stubborn, why she kind of fights against some things. Like, I feel like it was very clear to the reader why she was behaving the way she was. That doesn't necessarily mean that every reader is going to like her. I personally really enjoyed her. I really loved reading her journey. I loved our hero Khan. I think he was just one of the best romantic heroes that I've read in a fantasy romance in a really long time. He was extremely strong and powerful, and he deeply, deeply loved his, you know, the woman that he loved until she passed away and he believed that she was lost. And he never ever forces our current day heroine into anything. Well, he does at times, but it's never in a way that feels like he's just being a very typical alpha hero. You know what I mean? Like, it's very clear that this is a man who has a great sense of honor and duty, and he's trying to do what's right. And I think the fact that he's scouring the land looking for these shards of a broken dragon who meant so much to his previous partner, I think that says a lot about who he is as a character. Like, I just really, really enjoy him. I really liked their dynamic. I thought it was really fabulous. I mean, there are definitely some instances where she tries to not face the situation by using other things to sort of numb her or to put a halt to the conversation. And I also feel like that's a very valid, like, a trauma response. I feel like it was understandable, even if it was frustrating, how she would kind of block us from getting answers by trying to do something with the hero that was then going to limit their ability to have a conversation or talk. So I really, truly enjoyed this book. I'm very, very impressed with it. It was a 5-star read for me. That doesn't mean that it wasn't without its flaws, because it did have flaws, but this book had so much potential and promise, and it is truly one of the best romantasies that I've read in a long, long time. So I'm like, this is fully deserving of 5 stars, because I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was very well thought out. I thought it was very well crafted, and I just am very impressed. Another thing I didn't mention is this book's world is built so well and so cleverly and so just thoughtful. There is even like this glossary in the beginning, which is quite long, which tells you about all of every single thing you want to know about this fantasy world, like the dragons. What type of dragons do they have? What type of beings are there in here? What does this do? What is this type of land? Like, it's extensive. And as somebody who really enjoys reading fantastical history books, like, I literally love Fire and Blood by George R.R. Martin, because it's a Targaryen history book, right? I read the glossary. The author does say you don't have to read the glossary, you can just go into the story. As somebody who really values world building and fantasy elements, I wanted to read it, because I'm like, if I don't feel like this glossary is even worth my time, I'm not going to get into the book. If I don't feel like the fantasy world is set up in a way that I can vibe with, I'm not even going to try the book, because that's just gotten to be such a pet peeve of mine. I can't even stand it. So I read the glossary, and it did give me a really good understanding of the world. And I also think that that really helped this author not resort to info dumping, because she already technically did that in the glossary, and she's like, hey, you know, read this or don't. Here's all the history that you're going to need. I chose to read it, so I can't say if you skip it, if you're going to feel lost or not. But if you do read it, the history book, which is essentially an info dump right there, but it's not in fiction, so it's a history glossary, right? But if you choose not to read it, I don't know if you're going to feel lost. I did choose to read it. I'm very glad that I did, and I was able to really understand the story right from the get-go, and I really, really loved that. So I adored this book. It's 5 stars. It's probably my favorite read that I read in January, and I am very excited to see where the story goes from here. So now let's talk about the book that I did not enjoy. So this one is, I think it's called A Court This Cruel and Lovely. I had been seeing a few friends talk about this. I really didn't know anything about it, but people were just saying it was really fun, and I was like, I'm down for that, you know, because this month especially I've been reading a lot of heavy fantasy, adult fantasy without romance, and so I was like, I'm down for a really good, fun time. So I picked this up, and initially I really enjoyed it. The basic premise is, oh, the gods take away humans' powers at birth as a payment to protect the humans from the evil Fae. And if you are a human who actually ends up having your power, then you get punished and killed, and it's a really bad thing if you do that. And their heroine has also been dreaming of this guy with green eyes, and every time that she sees him, she is just like, in her dreams, she thinks there's some connection there. So something happens where she is revealed to have powers as a human, and she ends up running out of town, like running for her life, basically. And that's where she runs into I think he's a mercenary, the hero who is a mercenary, the green-eyed man, and he leaves her for dead. And so thus begins the way that they meet. She has to struggle through and survive, and then they end up meeting together and working together through the rest of the book. And honestly, I really enjoyed probably the first 40% of this book. I was really having a good time. I thought it was really fun. I felt like the opening scene did a really good job of getting you invested in the world and the characters. I thought that it was just really, really great. I enjoyed it a lot. I was having a good time. The writing was fine. It wasn't necessarily bad or good until I got to about the 50% mark, and then I feel like things really started to go downhill. Because we constantly had these very modern sayings put into this fantasy world. Like one I put in my Goodreads review is, mercenaries got a mercenary. Like, that's a literal thing that the heroine says to the hero. And I feel like, look, like, I know you're trying to be like this snarky, like in the style of Jennifer L. Armentrout, but then she would contrast that with very archaic type of language, and then the heroine would say, unhand me. And I'm just sort of like, this doesn't really work for me. Like, it just doesn't. And it just happened over and over again. And I really didn't see what the point of the whole story was. Like, I saw the point. I'm not saying I didn't get it, but it just seemed like once she escaped, once she had that survival moment when the hero kind of leaves her for dead. I apologize for the line up here. I'm filming. I'm trying to hurry. The light is coming up over here. Once that happens and she meets up with our mercenaries and they decide to sort of try and get her to safety, the plot really kind of gets convoluted and seems like there are a lot of things added that don't really make sense. I felt like we were doing good. We were doing fine. We don't need to have all of this other stuff added, except for, of course, it's there for potential books in the future, right? But it just seemed to really dilute what the characters were even doing, and our heroine just seemed like a very flat, stereotypical character, and our hero did as well, and that's another big pet peeve of mine. So the fantasy world in here seemed like it was set up interestingly at first, but then it very quickly devolved into things that we've seen and done a million times before. Like, this book is so extremely derivative to books that I've read before, and that's not always a bad thing, right? But to me, it really gives the feeling of like almost like a Babysitter's Club or a Saddles Club book, where it's like it's written to a formula. You know exactly what's going to happen, but it's not going to be like fulfilling at all, you know? Like, even as a kid, I remember reading Saddle Club books and feeling like, that's it? Like, and that's what a lot of these fantasy romance books that are coming out, that are getting popular, feel like to me. It feels like this is very obviously written to a pattern. We've got our broody bad boy who thinks the heroine is just like so hot, and then we've got our heroine who is sort of powerful, but maybe not, and maybe she doesn't know all of her powers, like she's got secret powers, and oh, she's also sassy, and it just seems like too much of a pattern, and I just cannot deal with that anymore. Like, there is something to be said with books feeling familiar in a way that gets you into the story easily, but I'm to the point where I'm like, I cannot even tolerate things that feel like this is trying to be either Jennifer L. Armentrout or even Sarah J. Maas, but it's like just been glazed with a different color. Like, that's sort of what this felt like. It just felt very unsatisfying, a little bit to a lot bit convoluted, And again, like, the hero's point of view was just like so stupid, because I don't even know why he had a point of view, because every time he came on screen, all he was talking about was how hot she was and how much he wanted her and how his body was responding. And I'm just sort of like, dude, can we give our male characters something else? Can we give them something else to think about other than how hot she is? Like, please, I am begging, can we do that? And then that's another reason why I really loved When the Moon Hatched. That other book, the title is just escaped. When the Moon Hatched, right? Oh my gosh, the title left my mind. But that was something I really liked about that romance, is that undoubtedly there's physical attraction and chemistry. But it's not all that they're thinking about, right? I just get so freaking tired of reading, specifically about reading men like that. It just makes me feel like, okay, this is a book written by a woman. Why are we constantly reducing our male love interest to something that is just so ridiculous, overdone, not interesting, and frankly a little disgusting? And also, like, not to even mention how degrading that is to men in general. Like, I know and love a lot of men. Like, sons, family. Obviously, my husband is a wonderful man. And I don't know why our women authors of fantasy romance and contemporary romance seem to feel like the only train of thought their male lead can have is lust or attraction. Like, why is that always the default? I told myself, honestly, that's one reason why I have really, really been selective about the contemporary and fantasy romances that I've been reading. I would much prefer to read an adult fantasy that doesn't give our male hero that type of an inner monologue constantly. But I caved. I decided to give this one a try because I'd heard so many good things about it, and it was truly so disappointing. So disappointing. Just, I don't know. I didn't like it. I didn't like it one little bit, and I swear, the next time I read something like Mercenary's Got a Mercenary in a fantasy romance book that also has language such as, "Unhand me, sir," I'm going to lose my freaking mind. So yeah, the first setup of this book was good. I felt like it had potential, but then it just kind of went off the rails and felt like it was written to tropes. It was written for TikTok, and I just, like, I'm so tired of that. So I personally don't recommend that book. That's just me, my opinion, my channel. But I very much do recommend When the Moon Hatched, because it was absolutely lovely and I can't stop thinking about it. So, alright my friends, thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you have made it this far, please feel free to leave me a wizard or a fairy, because we're talking about romantasy, and I'll see y'all in my next video.